It is April 3rd, 1978, a Monday afternoon in Harlan's Fork, North Carolina, and the spring has come in early and generous this year. The dogwoods along Pine Ridge Road are already in bloom, white blossoms catching the 4 o'clock light. The air smells of cut grass and warming earth, and somewhere down the hollow, someone has started a brush fire. You can smell the smoke if the wind shifts right. Children's voices carry across the neighborhood in the way they only do in late afternoon, high and free, running out the long school day. Harlan's Fork sits in the western foothills of North Carolina, pressed against the first rise of the Blue Ridge. A town of 4,000 and a valley between two ridgelines, it has the geography of a place that was settled because it was defensible and stayed because it was home. The mill closed in 1969, and the town absorbed that quietly, the way small towns absorb necessary losses by finding other work and staying put. Men drove to Asheville or to the furniture factories in Hickory. Women took in alterations, ran the diner, clerked at the hardware store. Nobody got rich, but nobody left either, or almost nobody. On Pine Ridge Road, a modest development of wood frame houses built in the early 1960s, the Callahan family has lived since 1971. Dennis Callahan drives to the highway department office in Weaverville 4 days a week. His wife, Patrice, runs the office at the elementary school on Depot Street. They have 3 children, Kevin, 13, Donna, 9, and Clara, who is 6 years old and who has recently developed an absolute consuming passion for flying kites. Clara Josephine Callahan is a small girl with a gap-toothed smile and dark blonde hair that her mother braids every morning before school with the quick, practiced efficiency of someone who has braided the same hair 500 mornings. She is curious and physical and not especially interested in sitting still. She can climb a fence faster than her brother. She has opinions about everything. She is, in the assessment of her teacher at Harlan's Fork Elementary, a child who fills a room. 2 weeks ago, Patrice had bought her a kite from the drugstore, a yellow diamond kite with a long tail of red ribbon. And Clara had been flying it in the field behind the neighborhood every afternoon since, or trying to. She had figured out the running start. She had not yet figured out the wind. On that Monday afternoon, Kevin was at baseball practice. Patrice was inside starting supper. Donna was in the bedroom doing homework with one eye on the small television. Dennis would not be home until 6. Clara asked, and Patrice said yes, and Clara took the yellow kite across the backyard, through the gap in the split-rail fence and into the open field behind Pine Ridge Road. Patrice watched from the kitchen window as Clara ran in long loops, the kite finally catching air, rising 20-30 feet, the yellow diamond bright against the pale spring sky. At 4,042 in the afternoon, Patrice turned to drain the pasta. When she turned back to the window, the field was empty. The kite string lay on the grass, trailed back to the wooden spool Clara had been holding, which sat in the dirt at the field's edge. The kite had come down at the far end of the field, near the tree line. Clara was not with it. "Ho!" She crossed the backyard in seconds, went through the fence gap, called Clara's name into the field. The sound came back to her across the open grass with nothing attached to it. She went to the spool, picked it up, followed the fallen string to the kite at the tree line. The yellow diamond lay crumpled in the longer grass near the edge of the woods, the red ribbon tangled. "No, child!" She turned in a circle, calling. The woods were Pisgah National Forest at the back, dense, second-growth forest climbing the ridge, the kind of terrain that a 6-year-old could get turned around in inside of 10 minutes. Patrice told herself that was it. She had wandered in. She had followed something, a bird, a sound, and gotten turned around. She went in 20 yards, calling. Then she went back to the house and called 911. The call was logged at 4:30 in the afternoon. The Harlan's Fork Police Department dispatched 2 patrol units within 4 minutes. Deputies from the Buncombe County Sheriff's Office were en route by 5,110. The first officer on scene, Deputy Carl Moss, walked the field and the tree line with Patrice. He was careful and young, and he asked the right questions without making her feel accused of anything, which she would remember later with gratitude. He asked if Clara was the kind of child who wandered. Patrice said, "She goes exactly where you tell her and no further." He wrote this down. Kevin arrived home from practice at 5035, still in his uniform, and immediately began searching the tree line with a flashlight, calling his sister's name until a deputy gently redirected him. Dennis arrived at 5048 and went very still for a moment on the back porch, looking at the field and the kite and the officers moving in lines through the long grass. Then he went inside to be with Patrice and did not come back out for a long time. Search dogs came from Asheville at 7015, German shepherds handled by state law enforcement trained for this. They were given a shirt from Clara's laundry hamper. The dogs worked the field fast, picking up a strong scent line from the fence gap where Clara had entered to the kite's resting point at the tree line. Then the scent turned south along the tree line, not into the woods, but along the edge of the field where a dirt service road ran behind the properties on Pine Ridge Road, accessible from the county road a quarter-mile away. The scent ended at a patch of gravel where the service road met a wider gravel pull-off, the kind of spot where someone might park a truck without anyone on Pine Ridge Road being able to see it, where a vehicle might wait. Deputy Moss was already on the radio before the dog handler finished speaking. The first was a woman named Bet Odom, who lived at the corner of Pine Ridge Road and the county road. She had been walking her terrier at approximately 4030 and had noticed a vehicle idling on the county road near the service road access. A dark pickup truck, she thought, though she hadn't paid it much mind and couldn't say for certain. The second was a 13-year-old boy, Jimmy Fry, who had been on his bicycle and who told deputies he had seen a man standing near the tree line at the far end of the field sometime around 4030 or 4030 or 4040. A dark pickup truck at the service road. These two things were entered into the case log. They would remain there for the next 31 years. By midnight, 50 volunteers had assembled at Harlan's Fork Elementary, organized into search grids by the county sheriff's coordinator. They covered the forest up the ridge for a mile in every direction. They waded the creek bed that ran along the hollow's floor. They checked the abandoned mill property on the eastern edge of town. Flashlight beams moved through the dark until 3,000 in the morning, when the coordinator called it for safety and promised to resume at first light. Clara was not found. The field was empty. The woods gave nothing back. The yellow kite lay at the edge of the tree line until a deputy bagged it as evidence sometime near midnight, and the field was dark. Oh, not dark. Oh! Dillard was 41, a 16-year veteran with the SBI who had worked 3 prior child abduction cases, 2 of which had ended in recovery. She was methodical in the specific way of people who have learned that the difference between a solved case and an unsolved one is often a single piece of information found on the 15th pass through the same material. She set up the command center in a room at the sheriff's annex in Weaverville. Maps covered the walls. The witness statements from Bet Odom and Jimmy Fry were blown up and annotated. The service road access point was surveyed and photographed. Tire impression evidence was collected from the gravel pull-off, a wide wheel tread consistent with a full-size pickup truck, and sent to the SBI lab in Raleigh. Every adult male with a prior record in Buncombe County and the surrounding 6 counties was identified and cross-referenced. Home visits were conducted. 73 names were on the initial list. 61 were eliminated by alibi within 2 weeks. The remaining 12 were interviewed repeatedly. Polygraphs were offered. 8 took them. All passed or were inconclusive. The other 4 declined, which was their right, and which told investigators nothing useful except that 4 people did not want to take a polygraph, which was not the same as being guilty and not enough to proceed. The tip line opened on the 3rd day. The FBI joined the investigation on the 4th, invoking the Lindbergh Law when the pickup truck evidence made an interstate abduction scenario plausible. The tips came in at the rate of 200 a day for the first week. A woman matching no one's description was seen in a grocery store in Boone with a child who had blonde hair. A man in a dark jacket had been seen at a gas station in Spruce Pine on the afternoon of April 3rd. A truck matching the tire impressions had been spotted in a parking lot in Morganton. Each tip required personnel, time, and verification. Most dissolved. The cruelest call came in the 2nd week. A man identifying himself only as knowing where the girl was provided a precise location, a farmhouse on a rural road in Madison County, 20 miles north. FBI agents and sheriff's deputies were there within the hour. They found an abandoned property with no signs of recent occupancy and no child. The caller was never identified. The deliberateness of the call, its specificity, its waste of investigative resources at the most critical window of the case. This was the kind of cruelty that agents logged in their reports without comment because there was no comment sufficient for it. Dennis Callahan gave a press conference on the 10th day, standing in front of the Harlan's Fork Elementary School where Patrice worked. He read a prepared statement in a level voice, asking for information, asking for Clara's return. He described the yellow kite. He said she called it her sunshine kite, and that she had been working on learning to fly it, and that she was getting good at it. His voice held until the last sentence. Patrice could not stand beside him. She watched from inside the school building, behind glass, because she could not be in front of cameras without losing the composure she had decided she needed to preserve. The investigation reached its first ceiling by the end of April. The tire impressions from the gravel pull-off produced a tread type consistent with several common truck models sold throughout the Southeast in the 1970s. No match was made to any specific vehicle. Jimmy Fry's description of the man in the dark jacket was used to produce a composite sketch. Medium height, stocky build, light-colored hair under a ball cap. Distributed across 4 states. Produced 200 calls. Produced nothing. Special Agent Dillard sat in the command center on a Friday evening in early May, alone after the other investigators had gone home, and read the case file from the beginning for the 4th time. She believed, as she had believed from the 2nd day, that the answer was in the tire impressions and the witness sightings. Whoever had taken Clara had known the service road was there. That meant local knowledge, or reconnaissance, or both. She wrote this in the file. She flagged it. She noted that no one from Harlan's Fork with prior record had been definitively cleared, and that clearing on alibi was only as good as the alibi itself. She kept looking. By June, the command center had been scaled back. The FBI maintained its case file. The SBI kept Dillard assigned, part-time. The Buncombe County Sheriff's Office kept a detective on it. The phone rang less. The phone rang less. Not for the drama of them, but because somewhere in the telling, someone watching might recognize something, might remember a detail, might make a call. Please subscribe to this channel if you haven't. What comes next is the part that took 31 years to arrive. Ended without Clara. The Callahan family stayed in the house on Pine Ridge Road. The decision was not made consciously or discussed at length. They simply did not leave, and then enough time passed that leaving would have felt like abandonment. Patrice returned to her job at the elementary school in September because not returning would have been worse. She sat behind the reception desk and watched children arrive each morning and held herself together with the particular discipline of someone who has decided that functioning is a form of commitment. She called Agent Dillard every Thursday at 2 o'clock. Dillard took every call. Dennis became quieter in a way that was different from his ordinary quiet. He drove to work, came home, ate what was put in front of him, did what needed doing. He and Patrice moved around each other with care. They were not distant exactly. They were careful. They knew how much was stored in the walls of their shared life, and neither of them wanted to be the one who caused something to give way. Kevin, 13 and already becoming someone defined by the event, channeled everything into school and into baseball, and then, in high school, into ROTC. He moved away as soon as he could, to North Carolina State, then to the Marine Corps, not because he stopped caring, but because caring from inside Harlan's Fork had become impossible to manage. He called every Sunday. He came home for Christmas. He never said Clara's name without meaning it. Donna, 9 when her sister disappeared, was the one who stayed closest. She moved to Asheville after college but came home every other weekend. She kept a photograph of Clara in her wallet. The school picture from 1977, the gap-toothed smile, the braids, and showed it to no one unless they asked, which most people eventually did. She became a nurse. This was not a coincidence. On Clara's birthday, October 14th, Patrice made a birthday cake every year. Yellow cake with chocolate frosting, which had been Clara's specific and unwavering preference from the first birthday she was old enough to express it. She made it alone in the kitchen and set it on the table and sat with it for a while, and then she cut it and brought pieces to Donna or to Kevin if he was home, and they ate it together without speaking very much. The split-rail fence in the backyard was repaired in 1980. The field behind it changed hands twice and was eventually planted in Christmas trees. In 1981, Special Agent Dillard reopened the active investigation for 3 months when a child fitting Clara's description was reported living with a family in eastern Tennessee. The family was located and interviewed. The child was theirs, legally and biologically. The dates did not align. The case went quiet again. In 1985, skeletal remains were found during construction excavation in a rural county south of Asheville. The discovery produced the worst 72 hours of Dennis and Patrice Callahan's lives. They sat in a waiting room at the medical examiner's office and held each other's hands and did not speak. And when the examiner came to tell them the remains were those of an adult male, probably in his 40s, Patrice put her face in Dennis's shoulder and stayed there for a long time. She was still alive in that moment. She had not been proven otherwise. She drove back to Harlan's Fork and made dinner. The 80s became the 90s. DNA technology arrived and expanded, and Agent Dillard, retired now but keeping the file in a box in her home office in Black Mountain, followed its development with specific, private attention. She contacted the SBI in 1993 about submitting the case for inclusion in the developing National DNA Database. Reference samples from Dennis and Patrice were collected and preserved. They were entered into CODIS, the national index, and began the long wait for a match that might never come. Dennis Callahan died of a stroke in November 2004. He was 67. He had spent 26 years making the same drive to Weaverville and the same drive home, and he was found in his chair in the living room by Patrice on a Tuesday evening, the television on, a crossword puzzle in his lap with 2 answers filled in. They buried him in the Harlan's Fork Cemetery on a gray November morning with Kevin and Donna and a crowd of people who had known the family all the way back to before. The Reverend said the right things. Kevin spoke. Donna read a psalm. No one mentioned Clara because she was present in every other thing that was said. In entity and mood all the 30s of the sexepin, a contemporary of Aclei, the Northix waiter assays, HNO 820s in aiding SBI, received a federal grant to apply emerging genetic genealogy methodology to cold cases in the state's backlog. The program was staffed by 2 analysts and 1 contracted genetic genealogist, a discipline that had been formalized only recently, the science of using consumer DNA databases not merely to find direct matches, but to map distant relatives, build hypothetical family trees, and work backward toward an unidentified individual. The Clara Callahan case was flagged for inclusion in the program's first cohort of 15 cases. The analyst assigned to it was a woman named Priya Okonkwo, 34, who had a background in molecular biology and had taught herself genetic genealogy through online courses and the emerging community of practitioners who were quietly beginning to apply the technique to cases that had stalled for decades. She received the case file in March 2009 and read it in a single evening. She noted the tire impressions. She noted Jimmy Fry's composite description. She noted the service road, the gravel pull-off, the evidence of local knowledge. She noted that every investigative path in the first 3 years of the case had pointed outward, toward strangers, toward itinerants, toward unknown men passing through, and that none of these paths had produced a result. She began working the DNA angle from the reference samples in the database. There were no direct matches to the Callahan family profile in CODIS. This was expected. Suo Dias contained criminal justice samples, and whoever had taken Clara had not, in 31 years, appeared in the criminal justice system in a way that produced a usable sample, or had simply not appeared at all. Consumer genealogy databases were different. Ancestry DNA's database alone had accumulated more than 2 million profiles by 2009 and was growing by hundreds of thousands each month. The Callahan family reference samples were not in this database. They had been submitted to CODIS, a law enforcement system, not a consumer platform. Priya's first step was to work with the family. She called Donna Callahan on a Thursday afternoon in April 2009 and explained the methodology in plain language. She said, What we are looking for is any DNA match that could help us locate someone who might have been in contact with your family, or specifically, someone who might have been raised by a person connected to your sister's disappearance. She said, "This is a long shot," she said. "I think it is worth trying," Donna said. "Tell me what you need." She and Kevin submitted consumer DNA kits in May. The results came back in 3 weeks. Priya uploaded the raw data files to the Genealogy platform's analysis tool and began the slow, careful work of mapping distant relatives, building family trees from shared genetic segments, identifying individuals whose trees intersected in ways that might illuminate an unknown. It took 14 months. In July 2010, Priya identified a cluster of DNA matches sharing a common segment that could be traced to a specific extended family from the western North Carolina region, a family with documented roots in Buncombe and Madison counties going back 4 generations. Cross-referencing the genealogical tree she had built against publicly available records, she identified a man in his mid-60s who had lived in Madison County in 1978 and who had subsequently moved to a rural property in eastern Tennessee in 1979. A man who had owned a dark pickup truck registered in Buncombe County in the spring of 1978. A man whose niece had submitted a consumer DNA test out of ordinary curiosity about her ancestry, and whose genetic material had, through the mathematics of inheritance, led a determined analyst backward through 31 years to a gravel pull-off behind a field in Harlan's Fork. His name was Raymond Dale Sutter. He had died of liver failure in 2001 in a county in eastern Tennessee without known surviving children, having lived for the last 22 years of his life on a rural property in a hollow outside a town called Irwin. He had lived there alone. He had not lived there with a child. Priya sat with this information for a full day before she called anyone. Then she called the SBI and by DTs. The Tennessee Bureau of Investigation partnered with the SBI within a week of the formal request. Raymond Dale Sutter had lived on an 11-acre property outside Irwin from 1979 until his death in 2001. After his death, the property had passed to a distant cousin who had sold it in 2003 to a young family who had since made extensive improvements. The original cabin structure had been demolished and replaced. The property had been landscaped, the outbuildings cleared. TBI agents interviewed the cousin who had handled the estate. He had not known Sutter well. Sutter had been a private man, he said. Quiet, kept to himself, worked odd jobs at a lumberyard for some years, then stopped. He had occasionally appeared at family gatherings in the 1980s and early 1990s. He had always come alone. The cousin remembered one thing specifically. In 1981 or 1982, he had visited the property in Irwin to drop off some tools Sutter had borrowed. He had knocked at the door and heard a child's voice inside. When Sutter came to the door, he had stepped outside and closed it behind him. He had said it was a neighbor's child, dropped off for the afternoon. The cousin had not thought much of it. The child had said 2 words through the closed door. She had said, "Who's there?" And the voice had been a girl's voice. Investigators located property records, utility accounts, and tax filings for the Sutter property for the years 1979 through 2001. The records were sparse. Sutter had paid in cash, filed minimal taxes, and maintained the property in the way of someone who drew no attention and required none. There was no school enrollment in the county for a child in Sutter's care. There were no medical records, no social services contact. Agents drove the hollow road to the property and spoke to the elderly neighbors who had been there long enough to remember Raymond Sutter. An 81-year-old woman named Pearl Hensley, who had lived 3 properties down since 1965, said she had seen a child at the Sutter property several times over the years. A girl. Blonde hair, she thought, though she was not certain. Her eyes had not been strong even then. The girl had been young when she first noticed her, maybe 6 or 7. She had waved once from the road, and the girl had waved back and then disappeared inside. Pearl Hensley said she had always wondered about that girl, had asked Sutter about her once at the mailboxes. He had said she was his daughter, that her mother had passed, that they were managing fine. Pearl had not pressed. She said, "I should have pressed. I know that now." Agents asked Pearl if she had seen the girl grow up, aged through the years she had known Sutter. Pearl thought for a long time. She said, I saw her until maybe the mid-1980s. Then I didn't see her anymore. She said, I thought maybe she'd gone to live with relatives when she got older. I didn't ask, she said. I wish I had asked. The question was now the hardest one in the file. If a child had been at the Sutter property from approximately 1978 through the mid-1980s, what had happened to her? The answer took 6 more months. This is the moment in every case like this where the investigators have to reckon with the possibility that the answer they find will not be the one anyone wanted. The Callahan family had waited 31 years. Ruth Dillard, retired and following the investigation from her home in Black Mountain, knew this. Priya Okonkwo knew this. Everyone in the file knew this. And then, in the spring of 2011, something happened that none of them had planned for, i.e. Chi. In Quest, the message was cautious. The user identified herself as a woman in her late 30s living in Knoxville, Tennessee. She said she had been adopted as a child through informal channels she had never been able to fully trace, and that she had submitted a consumer DNA test, hoping to find some record of her biological family. She said the match to the Callahan profile had come up immediately as one of her closest matches, and that she did not know what to make of it. She said, I have always known I was not where I was supposed to be. She said, I do not remember much from before I was about 8 or 9. Before that, there were only fragments. She said her name was Anna. She said she had been raised by a woman in Kingsport, Tennessee, who had told her she was the child of a cousin who had died young and left her without family. The woman had raised her with minimal documentation, no birth certificate Anna had ever been able to locate, no record of the informal adoption she had been told about. The woman had died in 2006. Anna had spent 5 years since then trying to piece together the beginning of her own life. Priya read the message 3 times. Then she contacted the SBI. The DNA comparison between Anna's submitted sample and the reference profiles from Dennis and Patrice Callahan, preserved in CODIS since 1993, was conducted at the SBI Forensic Laboratory in Raleigh. The analysis took 11 days. The result was a 99.997% probability of biological parentage. Anna was Clara. She was 38 years old. She had been missing for 32 years. She had been 6 miles from the Tennessee state line for most of that time, and she had not known who she was. And go, Hauer, but seg, going, Kementy, Abidar, Howe, Gen, go, Ordrin, Gore, from Knoxville to Asheville on a Wednesday in April 2011, and Donna drove from Asheville to a coffee shop near the Biltmore that a victim advocate had suggested as a neutral and private location. They had spoken twice by phone in the 2 weeks between the DNA confirmation and this meeting. Both calls had been short and careful, conducted with the particular delicacy of 2 people approaching something enormous and not wanting to damage it through haste. The advocate had helped. She had a language for the things they were both feeling that neither of them had independently. Clara had no memory of Donna. This was something she had said on the first phone call, quietly and directly, because she did not want Donna to arrive expecting recognition. She said, I have almost nothing before I was 8 or 9. I have some feelings about things, some sensory things. But not faces, not names, Donna had said. That's okay. We have photographs. We have time. She arrived at the coffee shop 20 minutes early and sat at a corner table and held her coffee cup with both hands and tried to manage what was happening in her chest. Clara arrived exactly on time. She was 38 years old, medium height, blonde hair gone darker with age, wearing a gray jacket, walking with the deliberate calm of someone who has been holding herself together since February and is not certain how much longer she can maintain it. She said, hi, Clara said, hi. They closed the distance, and Donna put her arms around her sister for the first time in 32 years. And Clara, who had not known she had a sister for most of those years, held on anyway, because something in the body recognizes what the mind has been denied. Donna brought photographs, the school picture from 1977, the braids, the gap-toothed smile, family pictures from the early years, the house on Pine Ridge Road, the backyard. Clara looked at each one slowly. She could not locate memories in them, but she sat with them. She said, she pointed to a photograph taken from the back porch, showing the split-rail fence and the open field behind it. She said, "I have a feeling about open fields. I have always liked them." She said it with a precision that broke Donna and held her together at the same time. About Patrice, who was 81 and living in a care facility in Weaverville. About Kevin, who had been called the day of the DNA confirmation and who had gone very quiet on the phone and then said he would drive down from Virginia the following weekend. Clara asked, "Does my mother know?" Donna said, "We told her yesterday. She's been told." "HC," she said. "She said she always knew you were coming back. She said she kept the cake recipe." Clara looked out the window for a moment. She said, "Yellow cake, chocolate frosting." It lived somewhere below memory, in the place where certain things are stored because they were laid down early enough to survive the loss of everything else. The visit to Patrice was arranged for the following week. Kevin drove down, Donna drove, Clara drove herself because she needed to be able to leave if she needed to leave, and everyone understood this without it being said. Patrice was in a wheelchair by then, her memory not entirely reliable, her eyesight diminished. But when Clara came into the room, Patrice looked up from across it, and whatever she saw or felt in that moment produced an expression that no one in the room had words for. She reached out her hand. "Where?" Clara took it. She said it the way you say something you have been saying to yourself for 32 years, finally aloud, "Bo!" He was, so far as anyone could reconstruct him from the thin documentary record of a deliberately invisible life, a man defined primarily by his solitude and by a disordered, unmedicated psychology that had never produced violence until that April afternoon in 1978. He had apparently told Clara from the beginning that her parents had died in an accident and that he was a family friend tasked with her care. He had, as best Clara could piece together from her own fragmentary memory, raised her with what she characterized as joyless adequacy. Not cruelty in a visible form, but the thoroughness of isolation. No school, no neighbors, no contact with the outside world beyond strictly controlled, infrequent errands. The rules were enforced through silence and unpredictability rather than physical means, which had their own cost. When Clara was approximately 12 or 13, the timeline was not possible to establish with precision. Sutter had driven her to a town in eastern Tennessee and left her with a woman he had apparently known from a much earlier period of his life. He told the woman, by Clara's later account, that the child needed a home and he could no longer provide one. He drove away and was never seen again by either of them. The woman, who had raised Clara through her teenage years without ever providing a clear account of who she was, had died in 2006. The full picture of why Sutter had surrendered Clara when he did and what the arrangement with the Kingsport woman had entailed was not possible to reconstruct. He had died in 2001. The woman had died in 2006. Clara had been a child through the relevant years and had not been told the truth about any of it. Investigators noted that the tire impression evidence from 1978 was consistent with a vehicle, make registered to Sutter in Buncombe County in 1977. The registration had not been connected to the case in 1978 because Sutter had not appeared in the initial canvass of persons of interest. He had no prior record and no obvious connection to the Callahan family. He had done day labor in the area that spring and left before the investigation reached the stage of interviewing casual laborers. Ruth Dillard, informed of the resolution by phone from her home in Black Mountain, said very little for a long moment. Then she said, "I knew it was local. I always knew," she said, 33 years. "I'm glad we kept going." No living person was identified as having criminal liability that could be prosecuted. The investigation was closed, the case status updated to resolved, and the file sealed. Tennessee, and the file sealed. Clara's status in the national database was changed. No longer missing. She has lived there since 2013, a 40-minute drive from the town where she was born and from the care facility where Patrice lived until her death in 2015. She took back the name Clara, officially, in 2012. She kept Anna as a middle name because it was the name she had built her adult life under and it was hers, and because she had decided early on that the project of recovery was not the elimination of the years she had lived, but their integration into the full account of who she was. She is a librarian. This is not a small irony. Books were the one constant of her childhood. George's discards, the county library's cast-offs, whatever the woman in Kingsport had on her shelves. And the library is, in the architecture of her life, the place that had always felt safest. She runs the children's section. She reads aloud on Wednesday mornings. The gap-toothed smile from the 1977 school picture is still there, slightly modified by 4 decades. Donna retired from nursing in 2022 and lives 10 minutes away. Kevin is in Virginia still, but he comes down more often than he used to. There are nieces and nephews, and the particular improvised texture of a family that has had to build its present out of a fractured past, which it has done, not without difficulty, and not without the ongoing work of therapy and time, and the specific patience that this kind of loss requires. The field behind it is still planted in Christmas trees. The split-rail fence is there, rebuilt, but standing in the same position. She does not usually go to the field. She does not need to. The field lives in her, in the way that the first 6 years of a life are the foundation beneath everything that comes after, even when the structure above it is built by someone else with different materials toward a different purpose. Last spring, she went to the county fair in Asheville with Donna's youngest grandchild, a 7-year-old who had been given a diamond kite as a birthday present and could not get it to fly. They went to the open field at the fairgrounds, and Clara showed her how to run with it, how to pay out the string, how to feel the moment when the wind decides to take it. Yellow against the spring sky. The child screamed with delight, and Clara held the string and watched it go, and the afternoon was ordinary in the way that ordinary afternoons are, full of the kind of uncomplicated joy that is, if you have learned anything at all from the long way around, exactly what is worth protecting. If you are searching for a missing loved one, or if you have information about a cold case, contact the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children at 1-800-THE-LOST, or visit missingkids.org. Genetic genealogy resources for families of the long-term missing are available through the DNA Doe Project and through state-level forensic genealogy programs. The tools are better than they have ever been. The file is never too old. Y is too old as T as day scroom. T, day scroom. Y, T.